excited to have a book lounge event. And if you go to our website, you can have a look under the books tab. We host several book lounge events. In fact, we've got quite a few coming up this month on book lounge. It seems to be the time for book lounge events. And today we have Dr. Danny Davis, who's going to be talking to us about his book. And then we have Prof. King as well, because I think this book is really relevant to where Prof. King's been talking to us and where he's been coming from. So bringing the two together would be fabulous. So I am looking forward to hearing from the two of them. Reaction buttons are open as well. So if you do like what's being said, please now, if you are happy to join the webinar, clap your hands, laugh, send us a heart. It's lovely to see everybody online. If you have a question for us, please put the question in the Q&A so it doesn't get lost in the chat. I'm going to be putting lots of links in the chats for you to be able to see a little bit more about what we're talking about so that you've got some resources. And after the event, we will summarize what Danny has said in a podcast style event recording but through our Spotify channel. And you can also see the frequently asked questions, all the questions and answers. So if you don't have time to go back and review what Danny said, all of that will be available on the page that you use to register for this event. But with no further ado, let me welcome Prof. Welcome to today's book lounge event, and welcome to Danny Davis. And I think the question that everybody is asking is, writing a book is such a exhausting process. I mean, not many people get to write books. So Danny, what led you to write this book? And is it your first attempt?
Yeah, no, look, thank you for asking. Not my first book, but there was quite a gap in between. My previous book won Computer Book of the Year award in 1985. So there has been some distance between the two of them, both thematically and in time. So yeah, what led me to this, and look, it's what led me to the research that I've done is really about how to engage some of these topics with an audience who is otherwise not engaged, those people who don't get integrated reporting, those people who potentially don't even get sustainability. What drives them from a governance perspective? What are they thinking and how do they think about the future? So I started off doing my research into that quite some time ago, ended up doing a PhD on it, as you do, and had the opportunity to engage with hundreds of directors, both corporate organizations as well as investors, as well as government, and get a real insight to what they were and weren't doing. And most interestingly, and I'll cover that as I get into the book, what the small number of organizations who are massively outperforming were doing that the others weren't, and how that fits into a governance perspective.
But what led you from IT and an IT book? How do you make the jump now to integrated thinking, successes of businesses, those special nuggets? What led you to that?
Well, it was a long-term transition. It certainly wasn't an overnight transition. Look, my personal career, I think, was always going, well, it's obvious to me what they should be doing. Why aren't they listening? Why can't they hear? And then I'd speak to somebody and I find out that they got it, but it was their manager. And somebody's always pointing up the tree to how decisions are made in organizations. And there's often comes with blame, but the more you get to actually engage those people, the more I've developed a huge sense of compassion for people at all levels of organization who generally are very professional, have their heart and mind in the right place, and are trying really hard within the rational constraints of their role. There are some exceptions, but very, very few exceptions. Mostly it is people trying very hard, and it is the systems of governance of decision-making across organizations that is influencing how they are able to make their own decisions. Let me get into a little bit of the bad of the book because I'll kind of
Thank you.
uncover some of that as I'm going. I've got a little presentation. I'm going to try and cover what is a pretty big topic set in 15 to 20 minutes. I will probably fail. And then we'll have some discussion points. I know there's some parts of this that Prof. King was interested in. I've noted some discussion points on the way through. So we'll
Brilliant.
come back to those afterwards and see where the discussion goes. But I thought I'd have a go at unpacking what is in the book in a quick time frame.
Thank you.
Let's see how
While
that
you're doing
goes.
that, I'm going to leave it to you and to Prof. I'm going to go behind the scenes, and I'm going to post some links as you're talking so that people can follow along. I'll also post, of course, a link to review and purchase your book, so people can have a look at that as well. So
Yeah, no,
off you go. Welcome to share.
that's great. I'll also be sharing the first 3 chapters of the book for anybody who kind of registers. I'll send a link through to that, and we can send that out free to let people have a bit of a read of what's going on here. So, governance. I think we kind of all know the kind of simple definition of governance as a systems of rules and practices and processes by which an organization is directed and controlled. That, for me, has always been a very passive description of governance. It's also, in my view, and from the people that I've spoken to at large scale organizations, I think I may have mentioned in the research I dealt with a lot of people that include directors across all of the ASX 10, the top 10 companies in Australia, including 7 of them are chairman. So, they do come in with a sense of ownership and a sense of being in charge of the organization because they are. So I've also put it that governance is a mechanism for exerting leadership in complex organizations that can be upgraded to excel in a more complex and volatile world. So I've covered a lot of that in my book. I've covered a lot of not just how it works, but also where it applies and stories of organizations who are doing it, who aren't doing it. And hopefully what I'm able to do out of that is give people a new perspective on what we already know. So we are a community of experts in this space. We're not new to this game. But hopefully I can bring people a bit of a new perspective on their skills that allows them to develop those skills further and apply them more effectively. So just a bit of context here. We're talking about improved performance in organizations. Advanced economies have seen 1% annual growth for over 25 years, constantly attracts words like sluggish, resistant. And what the Treasury research has shown is that 95% of that growth is coming from 5% of companies. So there are a small number of companies that are doing something that the majority of companies are not. And that's really what I set out to explain. Not the unicorns. There's no unicorns here. I'm not describing you Google and your Meta and your Apples and the organizations that have, generally speaking, extraordinarily strong and idiosyncratic leadership. We can't copy that. You can't reinvent that in a 50-year-old organization, in a bank, in a government department. I looked at the people who looked like normal organizations, looked like the rest of us, that were doing something different that led them to massively outperform. That's where we can find some interesting information. So let's get into that. So part of this is taking a whole step back and saying, what is an organization? If an organization is going to perform and it's going to be governed, what is it? On one hand, it is all about the organization of human labor. When we get together as a community, as we get together as a group of people working towards common aim, we do that within an organization. It's a construct we have created for ourselves to help align common practice towards common goals. And I like to say that if you look at people working together in a group towards common goals, it is one way to get near spiritual fulfillment, but generally not speaking in our companies. So why is that? What is it about our companies and how they operate as a legal person? So a legal person is basically saying under the law, in most jurisdictions, a company has been given the status of a legal person. And that's a fiction that has been provided to it to allow the organization to do things that a human being can do, enter into contracts, to own property, to do other things that a person can do. And my question with this is, so if the organization is a legal person, what kind of person are they? Are they a fulfilled person? Are they a random person who is just carrying on with life and living an unexplored life? And you have to do this in the context of what an organization is. It is a complex beast. Any sufficiently complex organization operates as a living system of autonomous components. It doesn't fit together like clockwork. It's a whole lot of people working together, and they all have their own minds and bring their own creativity and their own value. You can't tell them what to do at a sufficient scale, at a large scale organization. You can't simply instruct. The organization is too complex. The problem that it is working on is too complex. It has to be motivated. It has to be guided and led through value and values, through a system that helps align what they're doing. So as a legal person, what kind of person are they? And what can we do to get an organization to be a higher functioning, self-actualized organization? By self-actualized, I mean one who knows what its purpose is and is relatively competent at living out that purpose. It's not, it is living the explored life. It is self-aware of what it's doing and whether its actions are fulfilling and meeting its own purposeful existence. And if it's not, it does something about that. It is proactive about being a better person, about leaving a better world behind it, about interacting well with the people and the organizations around it to make better community. That is the kind of behaviors that you see in a fulfilled person. Is it the behaviors we're seeing in companies? And how can we drive that? So we'll come back to these kind of questions later as a discussion point. But that's kind of where I really saw the interest. When you're engaging leaders of large-scale organizations, they are aware of these issues. And I had the chance to talk to them about how they engaged with them and whether they felt their own actions in that moment were sufficient and met their own ambition. Did they think they were doing as well as they could? These are chairmen of Fortune 200 companies. They're not doing shabbily, but they were not living up to their own expectation of what was possible. And I think that's a real opportunity to engage with these people, where we found some organizations who were. So what are organizations? Living system. Ultimately, they are value creation machines. They are groups of people getting together towards common purpose to make the world better. They're not sitting there making the world the same. They're not sitting there to go backwards. They're sitting there to create value. Which leads us to the question, what is value? And that's a philosophical question. And for a philosophical question, I will go to a handy philosopher, Barbie, from the movie, What Was I Made For? And this is the kind of the question. What is the organization made for? Why does it exist? What are its goals? Now, it's not up to me to dictate to an organization what its goals are. It can choose to look at the SDGs, which we're all familiar with. It could choose to be purely focused on dollars. You do you. Be good at what you do. If you were looking at yourself as an individual and you chose that you are purely focused on the dollars, I'm probably not inviting you around for dinner. But, it's your choice. Be good at what you do. Most people looking at themselves choose a richer existence. if you look at any of the methods that are available for people to lift their existence and their self-actualization, they all of them talk about your relationship to others and being a contributor to others and being a leader with others. The same holds for an organization. Most organizations will, on introspection, find themselves looking at aspirations to work well with others, to work well for sustainability, to leave the planet better than they found it. My question to the chairman is, and are you actually doing a good job of that? Surprise, I guess, that came out of the research was the extent to which I was able to demonstrate that enhanced governance in these organizations, where it is found, in the small number of organizations where it is found, leads to better financial and non-financial performance. The higher level of effectiveness of these organizations, their higher level of productivity was so material that any additional cost was immaterial. It did not need to make choices. They needed to look at how they could be fulfilled in what they chose to do in a broad, multi-bottom line, integrated thinking capacity. If they did that, if they had the tools and governance to engage those issues with the sophistication to deal with the complexity, they performed better. So the motivation becomes self-improvement and motivated through your own success, not through some higher idealistic potential. And that I found engaged with, as I said at the outset, with people who were not otherwise engaged with these issues. They could not do anything but see themselves reflected in those objectives. Oops, backwards. So in all of that, we have the organization as this legal person. The board is the executive functioning. If you think of the person, you think of the brain, there is an executive function that overlooks and oversees. It's not necessarily the one who responds to catching the ball or going for a run or even having a meal, but it is the functioning and the consciousness and the aspiration and the purpose setting. And the one that does the self-reflection of, and am I living true to my own ideals? There is an element in which the board is the conscience and the direction of the organization. And again, in speaking to Fortune 200 chairs and down from there and government, while they are aware and willing to admit that role, they are also admitting that they have very little capacity to exercise that function on a day-to-day basis. So, at a more detailed level, we looked at through or described the governance within organizations through the research and through looking at organizations as an intertwining of different systems of control. So if you think about financial governance, and I always like to think about the word, whenever I talk about the word governance, which does mean different things to different people, I like to put myself and say, well, how does that work with financial governance? Financial governance is not just what happens at the board. It happens right through the organization. Everybody has a role in it, and those roles are clear. And the board has a role in it. It won't work well if the board is disengaged, and it certainly won't work well if the board is the only part of the engagement. So there is all this invisible plumbing of different levels that comes together inside these organizations to ultimately provide visibility and control and decision-making and control of distributed decision-making that the board is engaged in as the conscious part of that. Seeing, feeling, responding, assessing constantly. The board has the oversight and the trustee responsibility for the legal person and is able to exercise it through the systems of governance. Often referred to as the invisible plumbing. It's all there, but people can't see it. They can't own it. in the research, and I'm aware of time and I'm not going to be able to get to this in the level of detail that I'm sure a lot of people want, but it is in the book, so we can go there. There were three dimensions. There were all these parts and systems that organizations do, but importantly, there were three dimensions of mature practice that we identified. Integrated foresight, bringing together all of the different parts of the governance system and all of the information that they work with to have a common view. So everybody is working to a common view of where we're going and what we're doing. So they're not all working in separate directions. Second dimension is integrated practice. All of these different practices are not working in isolation. They're working to hand off to each other. And then integrated planning, as you look to improve the fitness of the organization, you're looking at how those systems can be brought closer together, how you can get more accuracy in that foresight, and everybody is planning to work as part of a single value creation machine. And through that, we called it governance of value creation. Very quick, because I can go on this for a very long time. What is the one thing that influences almost every decision on the planet? It's accounting. And I said earlier, this governance of value creation, you need to think of it in the terms of financial governance. So accounting influences decisions, but accounting is difficult. It's complex. Anybody who's looked at the accounting standards knows how complex it is. I can now describe accounting in 5 words. Accounting is data quality management for money. Right? It does not make your decisions. It allows people to make decisions on an informed basis, on a reliable, consistent basis. If you don't have reliable, consistent, comprehensive, future-looking, multi-bottom line, risk-contextualized information, you're making inconsistent, non-integrated, non-comprehensive decisions. And that's what most organizations are doing. They have the financial governance, but they don't have governance of future outcomes. They don't have data quality management for value into the future. And that is the difference between the organizations who are outperforming. They have better evidence present where decisions are made at the board and consistently throughout the organization, and they're all working to the same goal. So we built a value creation maturity assessment, looked at all the components, but it also looked at these 3 dimensions of maturity, and we found that people lined up into different phases, and this is consistent with the theory in the area. Most organizations are in what we call islands of excellence. They're really good at a lot of stuff, but they just never bring it together. And the organizations who were outperforming were in a phase we called integrated maturity. They were all working in the same direction. They were all handing off data to each other. They were all aware and working their part towards long-term value, and they could see it happening. Enhanced decision-making gives you enhanced performance. It's as simple as that. Integration is ultimately key. It is the difference, if you like, between these 2 vehicles you can see here. They have the same components. You could try and replace the components in that clunker up there, and you still wouldn't get a Ferrari. It is about the way the components in your organization are all deliberatively being designed to create a value creation engine. That is how you get aligned, high performance, effective decision-making, integrated thinking happening throughout the organization. Material increase. The research shows it. The research proved that I could align the maturity of practice to their long-term performance. Material increase in organizational performance. Productivity is possible, and it's happening now in a small number of organizations. So an exemplar case study in this was 800% ahead of the market, sustained over a 10-year period. This makes a difference. It's not playing around the edges, and the work on this was similar, whether we were looking at corporate, at government, or investor contexts. It's the same thinking. They are not different systems. They're not different financial governance. They're not different governance of value creation either. So that's what the research really told us: shared knowledge, effective action, and self-aware aligned upgrade. Enhanced integrated thinking in practice for enhanced performance in volatility, because we are operating in volatility right now. All of this came together in what we called a future fiduciary responsibility. We understand fiduciary responsibility, but really for boards to be able to engage with, and not just engage with, but assure the question: are we optimally invested in our own future? If we did everything we were currently working on through this highly complex organization, who would we be? Is that who we want to be? And if we want to be something different, what do we need to be doing now to make a future outcome? How can you control your own destiny? How can you become a master of your own destiny? By being self-aware of your own actions and have that visibility at the board and throughout the organization. So when I challenged chairman on this kind of question, most of them came back and said, oh, optimize. Well, well, we wouldn't use that word here. Well, we can't see it. No, we don't do that. And the chairman of my exemplar, who I was talking about before, and there were others, but he was special. Optimize. Oh God, you're never finished. No. Every decision in this organization, every single day, at the board and right through the organization, is improving the value of our long-term prospects. And when I said to him, so it sounds to me like you have a centralized governance framework that is influencing decision-making in alignment with the board's wishes throughout the whole organization. He's, yeah, governance. Yeah, I suppose we do. Never really thought about it like that. It's just what we do. So they saw it as an industry specific, very specific to their sector. And what I've been able to demonstrate through the research is that it was an industry specific implementation of a generalized model that we can measure people on. That's what the book's about. That's trying to give you some background to all of that. The book explores it and looks how it's been implemented in companies, in government, in investors, tells some stories, some good, some bad, some ugly, and really tries to bring people on that journey. I'm hoping out of all of this to give people a new perspective. I'm going to talk about a new perspective that gives you a new pathway to action. This is compatible with the whole alphabet soup of stuff that's going on out there. That stuff is not wrong, but this is a different way of looking at it, and it hopefully will change your perspective on your own world, on your own responsibilities, but also I think it gives you a new perspective on a lot of the other good work that is out there, and helps you find where and how to apply that thinking in practice. So that's the book. It's a pretty ambitious attempt at defining where we are with the future of governance, and what's possible, and what is happening out there now. I'm hoping that it extends the conversation about governance. I think governance hasn't had the conversation it needs about its link to leadership and its link to the future. Prof, I'd love to know how you see this aligns with your perspective on the future of governance and where governance needs to be and where the world needs to be. I'd really love to hear what you think.
Mervyn, can you hear us?
Yes.
Sorry. So Danny was just asking where you think we should be. Danny, do you want to ask your question again? Sorry.
Yeah, I guess I've kind of put the challenge out there, and hopefully get a whole lot of communication and discussion happening on what governance can do, and the nexus between governance and leadership in a world that has desperate need for more of both. I'm really keen to hear how it gels with your understanding of the challenge and the road ahead of us and the future of governance.
Well, Danny, what is interesting is that people have actually applied their minds to how boards operate, how executives operate. First of all, boards think, they don't do. Management does. And we started about governance with rules, and they became mindless tick box exercises. So today, around the world, governance is referred to as principles and with certain practices to achieve those principles. And it has to be mindful. And in the work I've done, to see whether you've been practicing good governance, which, as you correctly point out, is very important, you should achieve at least 4 outcomes. That's value creation, as you pointed out, but in a sustainable manner. Because of the degradation of planet Earth, because of the atrocious conduct of the limited liability company towards society over at least the whole of the 20th century, where financial profit was aimed at increasing the wealth of the shareholder, but subsidized by society and the environment. And it was a period on planet Earth that actually changed the approach to society and the approach to what are we as Homo sapiens, the superior creature on planet Earth, actually done to the planet that helps us to survive. Well, we have degraded it, we have abused it, and it was for financial gain. And as you point out, there's financial governance and there's other governance. Well, when I was chair of the United Nations on governance and oversight, it was there that I really learned about sustainability issues and got deeply into it. And at meetings in Geneva with the International Federation of Accountants. And they agreed with me 3 very important conclusions, which became a driver to work I did after that. I'm talking now about the beginning of this century. Financial statements and reporting is critical, but it is not sufficient for directors to discharge their duty of accountability to the company. This incapacitated person, of which they are the heart, mind, and conscience. The directors should not report to a particular stakeholder. The belief was that you reported to shareholders because they were seen as the owners of the company. Now, shareholders have no attributes of ownership. The shareholder cannot go into a company and remove a pen. It's a theft because it's the company's asset. It cannot use the company's assets. The director cannot enrich him or herself by seizing a corporate opportunity. It would be a criminal and have civil consequences. So what is this incapacitated person made for? It has to have a purpose. And the board needs to get together and make sure that this collective mind, because it's the collective mind that actually makes those business judgment calls, has agreed the purpose for which the company has been formed. They ask the question, I should ask the question, what are the value drivers of this business? How are we going to drive this business in a valuable manner and a sustainable manner? So what are the key risk indicators? What are the key performance indicators? And then the directors have to decide as this collective mind as to what are your long-term goals? What is it you want to achieve in the end? And it's interesting that we started off at the beginning of the century calling them non-financial aspects. Then it became other things, and eventually we arrived at ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And today it is being argued that it should be GES, because the most important thing is governance. And if you don't get your governance right, you're going to have adverse impacts on society and the environment.
Yeah, that's
the
really
governance
key.
is absolutely critical. And research has shown that enhanced governance, better governance, results in better performance and achieving those goals which are intended. Then you referred to the directors as trustees. So if you look at the etymology of the word trustee and guardian, trustee was the administrator, the administrating of trusts, pension funds, and bodies like that. A guardian is a person that looks after an incapacitated person, usually by order of a court. And the guardian not only looks after that person, but makes decisions about that person's life, financially and otherwise. So the preferred reference to directors of an incapacitated limited liability company is that they are the guardians of their company's assets and its business affairs. And accountants can save the planet. I said that in 2016 when I wrote my book, The Chief Value Officer. What I did was point out, Danny, that the accountant has now realized, and IFAC wrote about this in 2016 as well, that to think only on complying with the IASB financial standards as we do in Australia and South Africa is not sufficient, because it's not sufficient just to report the financial statements. You need to report, as was agreed with IFAC, also on the sustainability issues. But then you can't have them in two silos, because then you are reporting in a manner in which the company doesn't operate, because these things are integrated operation 24/7. 24/7. Therefore, to discharge the duty of accountability, you should be reporting in that integrated manner. Integrated thinking, I've described it as the Bastille, which has been stormed globally. Very few organizations today still think in silos. Integration has become a critical issue. And research has now shown that when you think on an integrated basis, you do get enhanced performance. So it was that thinking that led to the formation of the International Integrated Reporting Council, which I did as then chair of the Global Reporting Initiative, and Prince Charles with his accounting for sustainability. And today, integrated thinking has become something which has become global. And it's still a matter that I'm in discussion with the IFRS, that if you issue your financial statements according to the IASB standards, and I'm going to assume You do a sustainability report according to the ISSB standards under the IFRS. You still have them in two silos, which is divorced from reality, and you're not accounting to what you've actually done. Whereas an integrated report is a narrative by the most informed body of persons about what the company is and what it does, namely the board, and actually tells the conclusion that should be drawn from the financial and the sustainability information which is being given to the user. Now, there is almost a compliance panic going around the world at the moment, simply because I've described it as an eaten mess. We have the Global Reporting Initiative looking at sustainability issues from the inside out. What are the activities in the company and how do they impact on the economy, society, and the environment, the three pillars for sustainable development? Whereas SASB in San Francisco over the last 10 years looked at sustainability from the outside in. How does the economy and society and the environment impact on the value of the company? For example, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, it economically impacted on limited liability companies around the world. When there was the pandemic, it impacted on value around the world. So it's
really
double
interested.
materiality now when thinking about sustainability issues. And the EU came out with the mandated double materiality standard, which they have found is too voluminous. And there is the now called Omnibus project, where members of the EU Parliament have tried to dilute that Omnibus set of standards. The ISSB is still focused on outside in and has an audience which is the financially affected people. Well, the law, they can, a body of persons such as the ISSB is perfectly entitled to select an audience for its standards, but it doesn't permit the guardians, the directors of this incapacitated company from discharging their legal duty, which is to disclose to the user anything which is material, defined as something that could influence the mind of the user to think X rather than thinking Y.
Yeah.
So you have to have that integrated thinking in order to discharge that duty of accountability as well.
Yeah, I was
So
really
let me just
interested
conclude,
in
Danny, by saying that I agree with what you said. I just think that the thinking about all this has gone a bit further than even your thinking. That we are thinking, certainly people who work with me have said and are saying that is it fair to leave it to the user to draw conclusions as to how the financial impacts on the non-financial and vice versa? Or should the most informed body of persons, namely the board, actually say, in terms of the integrated reporting framework, how the financial is impacted on the non-financial and vice versa, so that the user is more informed and can make a more informed decision whether to continue providing credit to the company, whether to continue whatever it is, whatever the stakeholder relationship is with the company.
Yeah.
So you and I are on the same wavelength about integration. Only I think my thinking takes it a bit further from an accountability point of view. And I believe that accountants have to think as value officers.
I
They've got
agree
to
with that.
think, they've got to think not only in numbers. And today there are companies that have the chief value officer, and underneath him or her, they have the chief risk officer and the chief financial officer reporting up. So I'll conclude by saying what I said in 2016, which caused international debates, that the accountant is the true change maker in the boardroom, and the accountant can in fact save the planet.
Here. I agree with everything that you've said there, and I think that the work that's been done through the reporting frameworks and the disclosures and the need to disclose is huge. I deliberately left that running because I had little to contribute to that. I was asking the question alongside that of the chairman operating in that environment. How are you operating in that environment? And for instance, talking with a Fortune 200 chair, and we went through a whole lot of the sustainability issues and the risk issues, and their cybersecurity issues, and their environmental issues and their community issues, and kind of agreed the board got that they were an issue. And the board was committed and keen and really felt that these things were important to address. But the words that came back were, we get that. We've done a couple of those billion-dollar transformation projects to address them. And the project didn't fail, but it didn't make a difference. My interest in this was, how can the organization live up to its objectives, its aspirations? Many people, even the ones who are not part of the movement and at the forefront, they get it by now. They get the idea that there are these issues out there. And some of the people I spoke to lost their role as chairman because of stuff that went on in their organization subsequently that they just didn't have the control on. It wasn't poor will. They didn't have the control that was required in the complexity of dealing with the situation. But what I did find is that those organizations that did have controls sufficient to the complexity were making better decisions across the board and performing better. So for me, and the contribution that I feel I can make, is being able to identify, given that context, given what you need to do to be successful with everything that is going on, how can you do it? How can you lift your ability to fulfill your role, legal or otherwise, legal, moral, ethical, whatever it is, but your role? How can you do that within the complexity of today's environment? And who's doing it well?
Leaving aside being a director, a guardian, or a trustee of a limited liability company, just generally speaking, we as Homo sapiens, individually or collective in a community, we owe a duty to make sure that we're going to leave planet Earth not in a worse state than when you and I were born, when we were created. And the result of our behavior and the way we've directed the limited liability company, which is the main raiser of capital today and the creator of jobs around the planet, is actually, it's something that we should be ashamed of. And we have to start changing that mindset. And the mindset of the boards of companies has changed. I believe so.
So do you
From
think that we're failing?
making just financial gains and enrichment of the shareholders to creating value in a sustainable manner and preserving that value, or watching if you're eroding, for example, a natural asset, what do you do about it?
Hmm.
So all these things are being done to ensure that we actually leave planet Earth in a better position than when we found it.
So do you think we're failing because people are greedy, because they're not aware of the issue, because they're, morally bankrupt, or is there another explanation? Because for me, as I said,
I think
I ended up coming to them with great compassion
I think
of,
greed does play a part in it, but also political ideas plays a huge part. Political will can change a lot of things, and you've got to find that political will. I just
hmm,
point out the US-Canada situation. I happen to know Mark Carney. When
just
he
got
was
elected.
governor of the Bank of England, he was formerly the governor of the Bank of Canada. He's a brilliant economist and brilliantly understands the working of the financial ecosystem, of the global ecosystem. And he's going to outthink Trump. Trump can carry on, but I can tell you now, Mark Carney will outthink Trump. It is said, and I don't know the correctness of this, but there's certainly a broadcaster in Canada called Blundell. There's a commentator from Japan who's saying that it's very simple. If you look at the US bonds, which they've issued over the years, their bond is an acknowledgement of debt. And let's say Australia buys some of those bonds. Australia pays for the bonds. The United States uses the cash to improve its military, whatever it uses the cash on. And the bond has a period of time to repay, plus an interest rate, usually variable according to certain circumstances. Well, if you get the European Union, Japan, and Canada, and a couple other countries together, they have about 3.5 to 4 trillion US dollars of bonds. Now, if they leak those bonds into the market slowly for sale, it's going to cause a drop in the value of the dollar. For Trump and the US to repay those bonds, they'll have to start printing the dollar. When they print, inflation will go up. The price of eggs in the supermarket will go up.
Yeah.
And Trump will have a huge disaster on his hands.
Yeah.
So it is not only a retaliation of tariffs, it's the bond yields in the global capital markets of the world. And Trump is like a bludgeon, whereas Mark Carney is a surgeon. He'll cut through very carefully through this thing. And the other people like Mark Carney that are thinking along these lines. And Trump, he doesn't even realize he's got American companies to take McDonald's. McDonald's got probably a McDonald's in every place and town in the world, but it's paying franchise fees to and other things to the head office, which is an American company. And now they've got tariffs, and it's going to cost them more. So he's actually going to cause harm to great holding companies, United States holding companies. He hasn't thought this through. And suddenly the message has dropped, I think, to him. And so he's paused it for 90 days. But I think he's having a rethink. And let's see what happens.
I think that's an astute observation, and look, reading some of the writings on the interplay in financial systems is absolutely fascinating. But I still, for me, come back to what do organizations do in that? I think political will is part of it, but, politicians and governments haven't been able to get their way. They're not the most efficient at executing. Organizations are subject to what happens politically, but choose their own actions themselves. And what I found in the thousands of conversations investigating how organizations were engaging this complexity and exercising their own agency on their own people and their own capital and their own asset base as their existence. They had a brand, they had a market, what were they doing with that? What was their trustee responsibility to their existence? And there were some people out there who were able to exercise a more deliberative future and were performing sustainably, long term, better in that endeavor than the majority. And I think all of those things you're saying are true, but unfortunately, there's for most of us, mere mortals, we are mere spectators to that particular show. But we do have agency over our own actions. And if we are on the board of a corporation, if we are on the board or in the senior executive team within government, I think we need to be more reflective. I think we need to look at that self-actualization. What is our purpose? Why are we here? What is my role of trustee of the existence of this government department or 100-year-old company or whatever it is? What can we do to make the future better from where we stand? And am I fulfilling my own role, legal or otherwise, in making the future better? And I think that political would help. I'm not waiting for it.
What is interesting, Danny, is the principle of integration is a huge tool that I think is starting to. I persuaded in going back to 2008 and 9. I made a speech at St. James's Palace, and I'll just blow my trumpet for a while. It was said to be one of the best speeches ever heard at St. James's Palace. And I had, Prince Charles had invited the accountancy bodies from around the world. So people from Australia, from New Zealand, Australia have come together now, but New Zealand, South Africa, America, Belarus, you name it. There was societies or accounts from all over the world. And I put my principle of integration to them. And from that, his A4S and the GRO, which was chairman, started this process of teaching integrated thinking and doing an integrated report. And as your slides show, there's much research that shows when the board starts thinking on this integrated basis and the management operates on an integrated basis, you actually have enhanced governance and enhanced performance. And it's in a sustainable manner. So the integration is an amazing thing. It's amazing to think, Danny, that I grew up, and I think you're not as old as me, but you're old enough to have grown up to know that we had human resource there, financial department was over there, this was over there.
And IT over there.
And IT was right at the back, at the back, Carolyn. Now today you'd be in the front office. But it was incredible when you think about it. The one never spoke to the other. It's just quite extraordinary.
I think the chief value officer role is hugely important in being able to look at that what I call future fiduciary question of what are we doing? Where are we going? I think we're leaving what we're doing.
Yeah, I have to call an end to this because unfortunately we've run out of time. But such an interesting discussion, so much on the side. Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you, Prof. King. As usual, tremendous amount of wisdom. We will be summarizing it. It will be available on the event page. Danny, I'll include your link to the survey and accessing the mailing list on that event, on the event page, so people can access that afterwards as well. I'm not sure. You just tell me when you want to close down that free resource, the bonus resource, and I'll close it down on the website. So just let me know. But thank you very much. This conversation could have carried on for ages. Certainly, it's lots of information, and I'm looking forward to. And I must admit, mea culpa, I've only read a third of your book, so I'm looking forward to, just on the basis of this conversation, to finishing and to concluding and looking at all the case studies that you have in there. So within this context, so thanks very much for participating today. Thanks, Prof. King, and thank you to everybody online. It's really been very insightful, and we're looking forward to the next event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen, for your expert moderation.
And thank you for hosting discussions like this one, which is just a fabulous thing and huge
That's what we
contribution.
do at the Good Governance Academy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
We take wisdom like yours, Danny, and we spread it around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.